So you went to migratepc.com and you downloaded the Windows to Linux migration tool, and here you are in Linux Mint. So let's go ahead and install with the migration tool. It's a migration installation. First, we select English or whatever language you want, up to 70 languages supported. Also want to select the keyboard, the wireless if you're using wireless. Multimedia codecs. So as you can see, this is just the standard installation. It's exactly like the Linux Mint installer. Just from that message on top, install on migrate users, jacksnip.com, you know that it has this option. You have to choose the erase disk and install Linux Mint. You only can use the automated partition option. Any other option isn't going to be able to do what you want to do. So here you select your install drive, you select your copy drive. You have to make sure that if you choose the C drive for your install drive, it'll copy to the copy drive and then copy back to the install drive after installation. Just make sure you get them exactly how you want before you press install now and continue. And here you have to press OK. And this is only if you chose the C drive as the install drive, the copy files. And if that's the case, you get this prompt, you press OK, and then it starts copying the files. Now, as we're copying Windows files over to this copy drive before the installation starts, let's talk about why you want to switch to Linux Mint in the first place. And the main reason is moving to Linux is moving to the cloud. And with the cloud, there's no Windows needed. Linux Mint is a great app source. Just as how on Windows, there's all kinds of applications you can find that do all kinds of different things that you want to do. On Linux Mint, there's also lots of great options. The crazy thing is they're open source. They're free. They're included. Obviously, there's tons of web apps, cloud services in the browser that you can also use that aren't free. So it's not like you know everything's free and that's why you're switching to Linux. It's just there's an amazing amount of really good open source software that's professional grade and that can do all kinds of things that you need to do. But the overall best reason to switch to Linux Mint is it just works. You can have the hardware that you buy 100% working for you, doing what you want it to do, and it's incredible. So one of the interesting things about historically, just looking at the facts, Windows is history. In the past, Windows offered cheaper hardware, widespread adoption, native Windows apps. It no longer really offers any of that but widespread adoption, and even that is already waning. Picking the wrong type of OS can have dire consequences. Now, why is it that Windows has become a thing of the past? Clearly, it has to do with Microsoft abandoning Windows. And to understand this, you need to read the same book that they read. Clearly, Microsoft read The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton M. Christensen because they abandoned the Windows operating system before 2010. And they decided, instead of being an operating system company, that Microsoft was now going to be a cloud company. And you can tell by all of their actions ever since that time that they're a cloud company now. They launched Azure. They became one of the top clouds. And they took all of their services, things that they used to have all associated with the operating system, and they made them cloud services. And so Microsoft 365, you can use that on Linux Mint in a browser. It's just one more cloud service option on the menu. And the interesting thing that you learn when reading The Innovator's Dilemma, because really to be able to understand why Microsoft did that, you have to read the book, is that in order to make that decision to sacrifice your own product, you can't listen to the customer. And so in this case, Microsoft can't listen to operating system customers and hasn't been able to do that for 16 years because operating system customers are no longer its customer because it is now a cloud company. And as you can tell, Microsoft did this, became a cloud company to survive because the whole world is moving to the cloud. Everyone's moving to the cloud. And by switching to Linux Mint, you can move to the cloud too. Because the cloud runs on Linux. And even Azure does. The majority of Azure, it mostly runs on Linux. And that's one of the reasons Microsoft has been so successful as a cloud company, because it's embraced Linux and open source software in general. In fact, it's open sourced key pieces of software itself, like Visual Studio. It's supported cloud standards. It helped come up with one of the most successful solution for web apps, which is principally what you can find in Windows 11 now. If you look at WebAssembly, it's the best way to do a web app. And Microsoft was one of the companies that helped start that. So we have the cloud, and we have Linux, which is a disruptive technology, and we want to understand why disruptive technologies like Linux make existing technologies, companies that have existing technologies, fail. And so if we look at what we learned from the book, we learned that innovations that create a new market, eventually disrupting an already existing market and replacing an existing product, are just standard things that recur throughout history. And so by looking at examples in history, which the book does, it goes through all kinds of really great examples, like with disk drives, and it shows how different products and different companies get disrupted by new products that initially start out with lower performance and then increase in performance over time. And it shows us that there's a new paradigm. And for us, it's the cloud. And the cloud is ubiquitous. If you have a cloud service, it works everywhere, which includes Linux. And Microsoft understood this paradigm before they made this decision and decided to pivot. And they continually researched and tried to find the best way to do cloud services because they were now a cloud company. And that's what enabled them to help come up with WebAssembly and make that the reality that it is. And ever since 2020, WebAssembly has been widely supported. Okay, so here's the most important part. Don't hit the right change to the disk unless you did the copy drive and you did the install drive and you have the migration in place. But obviously, if you selected your install drive and you selected your copy drive, then you know that you're doing a migration installation and everything's going to be fine. If you didn't go to the erase entire disk and use the automatic partitioning tool, then it's not fine and you wouldn't want to just go through like that's no big deal. But as long as you select install drive and the copy drive, then you're doing a migration installation. It's just like Linux Mint. You just entered all your information, your username and your password. Oh, that username that just entered, you want to make sure that it's the exact same username as your Windows username if you want to keep that username. If you don't match one of the usernames from your Windows system, you will get a new username. Whatever you entered just now will become a new username on the system. But if it's an exact match of one of your existing username, then you'll just stick with just that username. Or if you have multiple usernames, as long as one of them is that exact username, then you'll have the same number of usernames and everything will match up. And so that's the bottom line, is if you want to keep your users the same, or at least number of users the same, then take one of the usernames and make sure that you use that exact name when you type it in to Linux. The difference with Linux usernames is they're always lowercase. And so it'll do that for you, though. You'll notice when you go to type it in, if you don't make it lowercase, it'll make it lowercase anyway. But if the Windows username had spaces, just use an underscore. So we copied files beforehand. Now this is the actual install. It's no different than the regular Linux Mint installer. This is just the Linux Mint installer. But after a lot of this goes on, towards the very end, we'll do the copying again, because first we copied, we already finished the copy from the install drive to the copy drive. But just after the install is done, but before it finishes, we'll watch all those files from the copy drive get copied back to the install drive. So we were talking about disruptive technologies, and if you look at one of the charts in the Innovator's Dilemma book, the one titled The Impact of Sustaining and Disruptive Technological Change, there's a graph, and it's a famous graph that shows the comparison between an existing sustaining technology and a disruptive technology. And if you were to graph that with Linux, you'd see, like Microsoft did, that around the turn of the century, the Linux desktop met market needs. And this is troubling for a company who your primary business is to create operating systems. So they obviously took note of that. And by the time 2010 rolled around, they had obviously decided to act on that. And surprisingly, their decision was to completely leave the operating system business altogether and leave that to Linux. And they went to the cloud business. Now, this is, from here on out, the book, like this chart, it doesn't work because nobody does that. Most companies just sit there and they look at the chart, kind of, it's like a bad investment, that starts to go bad, and they just wish, they lie to themselves, and they wish things were different, but they don't actually change. It takes a lot of gumption to sacrifice your product. Most companies don't do that. If you look at Novell, like with NetWare, Novell's dead. Like the products, like NetWare and those kinds of products still live on, because they were sold so many times that other companies are still using them. But the company itself no longer exists. And so it's very interesting when you look at, other companies that go through these paradigm shifts, how almost historically most companies, even if they're aware of what's happening, even if they see it as it's happening, that their product is being disrupted by this other product, they almost never react in time. But Microsoft clearly has. As a company, they're doing fine. But their actions in having dropped the Windows operating system 16 years ago clearly changed the graph. And so normally what we'd see is this disruptive technology, Linux, it had already met the performance demanded at the low end of the market, and we'd see as it continued to go up and met the demand at the high end of the market, which it obviously has done already, and it's still going up, we'd see that the competing existing products would be a line above that because they're continuing to progress due to sustaining technologies, because sustaining technologies are always improving, which is what keeps them at the top. But according to the book, that's also in part what kills them. It's a really interesting book. I highly recommend it. I've read it multiple times. But the thing with this graph is since Microsoft abandoned Windows, since they dropped the operating system and they became a cloud company, the graph totally changes, and all of these customer complaints that they're ignoring because they don't listen to their operating system customers because they can't, because the book tells them not to. The arrow, it's not sustained. The arrow goes down. So this is a really weird graph. I don't even know how to graph it, but basically Linux has surpassed not just the performance demanded at any point in the market, at the low end, the high end. Linux desktop has surpassed the Windows desktop. This is incredible. But at the same time, it's not really too much of a surprise, especially when you look like Microsoft did at history. It's inevitable that a disruptive technology like Linux is going to win, because the disruptive technology always wins. And so they obviously made the right decision. They wanted to keep their firm going. They didn't want to fail. And so they pivoted. They switched from operating systems to the cloud. And you can tell in everything they're doing that they're a cloud company. Even the Windows operating system itself, one of the complaints people have is that the Windows applications, we talked about one of the things Windows used to offer were native Windows apps, which, it no longer has, because, you go into Windows 10, Windows 11, and no matter how native the app looks, almost all the apps are actually web apps that are, just dressed up nice to look like an app, but it's really just a web app. And so you wonder, well, why is the resource usage so bad? Why is this taking so long? I bought this brand new computer, but it doesn't really seem much faster. And it's because it's running web apps. And obviously, if you're using the best kind of technology to do your web app, which Microsoft helped develop, again, ever since 2020, it's been supported. But the thing is most everyone already had their web apps made by 2020. And it's really hard to redo an app, at least, it has been in the past. It might be easier now with AI translation. But a lot of companies haven't bothered to rewrite their apps into WebAssembly to use the latest and the greatest in their web apps. They're just thinking they're already on the cloud, everything's okay, and we'll just keep on doing what we're doing. And so that's part of the reason why there isn't better Linux support, is because a lot of the technologies, the initial web app technologies, weren't ubiquitous, which doesn't qualify for cloud solution. In order to be a cloud solution, it has to work everywhere. And WebAssembly applications do. And Google is a good indicator of how to do things right. If you remember when Ajax came out, Google Maps was the site that showed everyone how to use it. And once everyone saw what Google Maps did with Ajax, Ajax took off. And then every website had Ajax on it. Now, if you look at Google Maps now, what is it using? It's using WebAssembly. Of course, the entire Google workspace is using WebAssembly because Google is a cloud company and they offer cloud services using WebAssembly. Now, so as a portal, clearly Windows is a broken portal, and so staying on the Windows operating system doesn't make sense because it's failing us in that sense that it's no longer a place where you can find what you need to do. It's not a connection point to find the solutions you need. The portal is the cloud. And so if you're on Azure, then you're still a Microsoft partner on a Microsoft platform. But if you're on Windows, you're not a Microsoft partner anymore. You're a Microsoft competitor because Windows is now a cloud service provider. And so they're just another app provider just like you are. So if you're providing an app on Windows, the first thing you need to do is do what Microsoft is doing and make your app ubiquitous. And the best way to do that, ever since 2020, has been to use WebAssembly. And technology is what drives things forward. It shapes power structures within society. Windows used to do that, but now it's Linux. Linux powers the internet. Linux powers the cloud. Open source technologies like Kubernetes have just doubled down on Linux. The cloud it runs on open source. And we already talked about how from Linux you can use any cloud service like Google Workspace, Microsoft 365, and other recognizable companies like Adobe Photoshop for the web also uses WebAssembly. And so Adobe has figured out how to do things right for cloud service, so we'll probably see more of those from them. AutoCAD 2D is also a WebAssembly cloud service. So clearly, companies could do more WebAssembly services, but it's known how to do it, and it is happening slowly but surely. What's amazing is if we watch the line on that graph moving forward, is open source isn't just going to take off in the cloud, it's also taken off in hardware. Specifically, look at RISC-V. If you've probably heard of Sci5, the company that may go public soon. But specifically, if you look at projects they help start, like Open Road, Rise, projects to do open source hardware using RISC-V chips, and getting Linux to support that open source hardware with Rise, this shows where things are headed. So Linux is going way above just the performance at the high end of the market. They're redefining the market. The cloud is going to have a whole bunch of new RISC-V based devices, and not just servers. We're talking about desktop, laptops, phones, all kinds of new RISC-V devices. This is huge. This is revolutionary. And actually, more specifically, this is disruptive. But this is exactly what Linux has always had the potential to do, and Microsoft saw this. Now, when it comes to competition, even though Microsoft has successfully pivoted, and they have made a lot of good cloud services off of what they had, some of their cloud services are more challenged than others. We already talked about how Microsoft 365 has the competitor of Google Workspace. If you look at Microsoft Active Directory, it also has direct competition in Jump Cloud. And Jump Cloud is a disruptive cloud solution that's very well, let's just say, if you're using Active Directory, you should look at Jump Cloud. It's a very nice cloud service. But there are basically two great collisions. A world driven by technological progress, which means faster and faster solutions, which should mean faster and faster solutions, and a corporate drive to add complexity that stops faster hardware from benefiting the customer.